Dear Mother, down here it's dark. Darker than the inside of a church at midnight. Darker than the coal holds of the ships we used to watch being loaded in Duluth. Dark enough that when you close your eyes, it makes no difference whether they're open or shut. But tonight that darkness feels holy, Mother. Feels like we're inside something sacred and terrible and transformative all at once. We sent one fish swimming this evening, watched through the periscope as it tracked true and straight toward a Japanese merchant ship, held our collective breath during those eternal seconds between launch and impact, and then felt the concussion through the hull when 1,800 pounds of Torpex explosive found its target, and an empire trembled. I'm writing this in the torpedo room of the USS Tang, sitting on the deck between tubes 1 and 2, the smell of oil and sweat and compressed air thick in the recycled atmosphere, my hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline and the knowledge that we just sent men to the bottom of the Pacific. The brass fittings on these Mark 18 torpedoes gleam dully in the red battle lighting, 21 feet of steel and explosive and mechanical genius that traces its lineage back 80 years to an English engineer named Robert Whitehead, who built something his own Navy called ILEGAL, who defied authority and conventional wisdom to create a weapon that changed naval warfare forever. That's what I want to tell you about, Mother. Not just the battle we fought tonight, though I'll describe that too. But the legacy we're carrying forward. The invention that makes submarines like Tang the most effective weapons in the Pacific. Because every time we load a torpedo into these tubes, every time we fire and watch it run true toward a target, we're honoring a man who was told his idea was impossible and illegal and dangerous, who built it anyway because he understood that innovation doesn't wait for permission, that sometimes the most important advances come from people who refuse to accept what authority tells them can't be done. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment if someone in your family ever built or fixed something that made history. Every invention tells a human story. Let's keep them alive. Because what Whitehead created in a workshop in Fiume in the 1860s is what's giving us the tools to win this war in the Pacific in 1944, and that connection across time and technology and human ingenuity is worth remembering, worth celebrating, worth understanding as more than just military hardware but as proof of what determined people can accomplish when they refuse to give up on an idea. My name is Thomas R., a machinist's mate 2nd class in the United States Navy, assigned to USS Tang, a Belau-class submarine operating in the Pacific Theater. I'm 25 years old from Duluth, Minnesota, and before the Navy, I was an apprentice machinist in the shipyards on Lake Superior, learning the trade that's kept me alive down here in the depths where mechanical knowledge is the difference between surfacing and sinking, between completing the mission and becoming a tomb for 78 men. You remember those docks, Mother. Of course you remember. You worked cleaning the offices there after Dad died. Walked me to the shipyard gates every morning before your shift started. Made sure I understood that honest work with my hands was as noble as any profession. That building things and fixing things and understanding how machines work was a calling as worthy as medicine or ministry. Those cold Duluth mornings, walking through pre-dawn darkness with frost in the air and the sound of industry already beginning, hammers on steel, cranes lifting loads, the distant groan of ships being berthed or repaired. That was my education, Mother. More valuable than any classroom, more formative than any book. Winter of 1936. That's the memory I keep returning to down here in the tropical Pacific heat. I was 14, just starting my apprenticeship, still small enough that the veteran machinists would joke about whether I could actually lift the tools I was supposed to use. It was December, the lake already starting to freeze, snow falling in that way it does in Duluth where it seems to come from every direction at once, and we were working on refitting a ore freighter's engine. The smell, Mother, cold iron and burning coal drifting from the foundry, the sharp clean scent of snow mixing with industrial smoke, coffee brewing in the break room that was too strong and too bitter, but perfect for warming frozen hands. The sound of hammers on steel, rhythmic and constant, a dozen men working in coordination without needing to speak, each one knowing his role in the larger project of keeping these ships running. And your voice, Mother, humming hymns while you scrubbed floors in the office building, your faith constant and comforting even in the grinding labor of widow's work. I remember the wrench I was trying to use. Massive thing designed for men twice my size. The handle rough with rust and use, cold enough to burn my palms through thin work gloves. Remember the taste of snow and industrial air, metallic and gritty, settling on my tongue as I breathed. Remember steam rising from the lake as cranes lifted hull sections into the fog. Remember thinking that this was what progress looked like, this combination of human labor and mechanical advantage and collective effort towards something larger than any individual could accomplish alone. You brought me hot cocoa during breaks, Mother. Carried it from home in that battered thermos that never quite sealed properly. The chocolate always slightly lukewarm by the time it reached me, but tasting like love and concern, and the determination to keep your son warm despite winter and poverty, and the exhaustion of working 2 jobs to keep us fed. You're building important things, you'd tell me, your hands raw from cleaning solutions and cold water. Ships that carry iron and grain, ships that feed cities and build industries. That's sacred work, Tommy. Don't ever think it's less important than what educated men do in offices. I thought you were just trying to make me feel better about being a machinist's apprentice instead of going to college or becoming something more prestigious. But I understand now what you were teaching me, Mother, that all honest work has dignity, that understanding machines and materials and the principles that make things function is its own kind of intelligence, that the men who build and maintain the tools of civilization are as essential as the men who design them or command them or profit from them. The Navy took that education and refined it, Mother. Took a boy who knew how to fix ore freighter engines and taught him to maintain diesel engines and electric motors and hydraulic systems and torpedo mechanisms in the most complex war machine ever created. Submarine duty isn't glamorous like flying fighters or commanding battleships. We're sealed in a steel tube 300 feet long and 27 feet wide, living in each other's pockets for weeks at a time, breathing recycled air and eating canned food and trying to stay sane while Japanese destroyers hunt us with depth charges that can crush our hull like an aluminum can if they detonate close enough. But Mother, the machinery is beautiful. I know that sounds strange, calling instruments of war beautiful, but there's elegance in good engineering that transcends its purpose. Grace in mechanical systems that work exactly as designed. Artistry in the way competent designers solve complex problems. The submarine itself is a miracle of engineering, a vessel that can submerge to 400 feet, cruise underwater for days, navigate by dead reckoning when submerged, surface to recharge batteries and exchange air, dive again before Japanese aircraft can spot us. Every system has redundancy, every critical component has backup. Every potential failure mode has been anticipated and countered. And the torpedoes, Mother, the Mark 18s we carry now, after years of problems with the earlier Mark 14s, they're descendants of Robert Whitehead's original design from 1866, refined and improved through 8 decades of development, but still based on his fundamental innovations, self-propelled, using compressed air or electric motors, depth-controlled through a hydrostatic mechanism that Whitehead invented, gyro-stabilized to run straight, capable of carrying enough explosive to sink ships 10 times their own displacement. Whitehead was an English engineer working in Fiume, that's in Croatia now, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire then, and he was approached by an Austrian naval officer named Giovanni Lupus, who had an idea for an underwater weapon but couldn't make it work. Lupus's concept was crude, unmaneuverable, more likely to kill its operators than its targets. But Whitehead saw potential, saw that with proper engineering, an underwater weapon could revolutionize naval warfare, could make surface ships vulnerable in ways they'd never been before. The problem was that the Austrian Navy, the navy he was ostensibly working for, thought the idea was illegal, unethical, contrary to the honorable traditions of naval combat. Attacking ships from beneath the water, striking without warning, using mechanical devices instead of facing the enemy directly. It all seemed dishonorable, unchivalrous, wrong in ways that made military officers uncomfortable. They told Whitehead to abandon the project, told him underwater weapons had no place in civilized warfare, told him to focus on conventional armaments that fought according to accepted rules. Whitehead ignored them, Mother. Worked in secret, refined the design, solved the technical problems one by one. Propulsion, steering, depth control, range, explosive payload. By 1866, he had a working prototype that could travel several hundred yards at 6 knots, maintaining constant depth, tracking straight toward its target. By 1868, he'd improved it enough to demonstrate to the Austrian Navy, who promptly changed their minds about whether underwater weapons were illegal once they saw how effective they could be. That's the lineage I'm carrying forward down here in Tang's torpedo room, Mother. A weapon born from defiance, perfected through determination, built by a man who understood that innovation doesn't wait for official approval, that sometimes the most important advances come from people who are willing to work outside the system, to challenge authority, to prove through demonstration that what everyone said was impossible can actually work if you're skilled enough and stubborn enough and brave enough to try. Tang is a good boat, Mother, well built and well commanded, with a crew that knows their jobs and trusts each other enough to function effectively in conditions that would drive most men insane. Our captain is Commander Richard O'Kane, finest submarine officer in the Pacific according to most everyone who knows submarine warfare, and he's already made Tang one of the most successful boats in the fleet. 3 war patrols completed before I joined the crew, 24 ships confirmed sunk, over 90,000 tons of Japanese shipping sent to the bottom. This 4th patrol we're on now, we've already added 6 more ships to that total, 6 more contributions to the slow strangulation of Japan's merchant fleet that's eventually going to win this war for us. Living in a submarine is like living inside a machine, Mother, like being a component in a larger mechanism where every person has a specific function and any failure can kill everyone aboard. The forward torpedo room where I work, that's home for maybe 15 men, hot bunking, sharing racks because there aren't enough berths for everyone, sleeping in shifts between watches and battle stations. The smell is overwhelming until you get used to it, and then you stop noticing. Diesel fuel and battery acid and hydraulic fluid and human sweat and the peculiar metallic scent of air that's been breathed too many times and scrubbed through CO2 absorbers to keep us from poisoning ourselves with our own exhalations. The heat is worse than the smell, Mother. Tropical Pacific, submerged most of every day to avoid Japanese aircraft. No air conditioning, just fans that move the hot air around without cooling it. Men work stripped to the waist, sweat constantly, drink water by the gallon to avoid heat exhaustion. The metal of the hull, the machinery, the torpedo tubes, everything is warm to the touch, sometimes hot enough to burn if you're not careful. That scar on my wrist from training, the burn I got from a boiler valve, that's nothing compared to some of the injuries men have gotten from accidentally touching steam pipes or hot engine components down here. But the men, Mother, the men make it bearable. Chief B.D., our torpedo chief, 20-year Navy veteran who knows these weapons better than anyone alive, who calls them quiet thunder and treats each one with respect bordering on reverence. These fish are what make us dangerous, he told me when I first reported aboard. Everything else, the submarine, the crew, the tactics, it all exists to deliver these weapons to their targets. We're just the delivery system. The torpedoes are what actually win battles. Lieutenant K, we call him Red for his hair, navigator who plots our courses and calculates firing solutions and jokes that Whitehead's ghost rides in every shot we take. Red's got a college education engineering degree from some university in New York, could probably have gotten a safe assignment on a surface ship or shore duty, but he volunteered for submarines because he wanted to be part of the most effective anti-shipping campaign in naval history. We're making a difference, he says. Every merchant we sink, every transport we send down, that's supplies and reinforcements that never reach Japanese garrisons. We're winning the war one torpedo at a time. And then there's Seaman Paul, newest member of the crew, barely 19 years old, still crosses himself before every torpedo launch, still whispers prayers in the seconds between firing and impact. Paul's Catholic, devout in a way that makes some of the other men uncomfortable, but that I understand because of you, Mother. Because I grew up watching you pray before every meal and every bedtime and every moment of crisis or celebration. Paul prays for our safety and for success in our mission, and even, I've heard him, for the souls of the Japanese sailors we're about to kill. That takes a special kind of faith, Mother, the kind that acknowledges the humanity of the enemy while still doing what needs to be done to defeat them. Tonight's attack started at 1800 hours, 6 p.m. in civilian time, when the officer of the deck spotted smoke on the horizon through the periscope. We'd been running submerged all day, patrolling off the coast of Formosa, where Japanese convoys run supplies from China to the Philippines, hunting for targets in sea lanes we knew they had to use. The smoke meant ships, probably a convoy, and immediately the boat went to battle stations, every man moving to his position in a choreographed dance we'd practiced hundreds of times. I was already in the forward torpedo room, my battle station, responsible for tubes 1 through 6, monitoring depth settings and gyro angles and compressed air pressure, ready to load and fire on command. Chief BD was there too, supervising, his experienced hands checking every gauge and valve and mechanical connection, making sure nothing would malfunction when the moment came. The torpedoes were already loaded. We run with all tubes loaded on patrol, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Mark 18s with electric motors instead of compressed air, leaving no wake for enemy lookouts to spot, running straight and true if we did our jobs correctly. Commander O'Kane maneuvered us into position, bringing Tang to periscope depth, raising the scope for quick looks at the target, lowering it immediately to avoid detection, building a picture of what we were facing. 4 ships, he reported over the announcing system, his voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline we all felt. 3 merchant ships and 1 escort destroyer, zigzagging in a defensive pattern, maybe 6,000 yards away and closing. We'd let them come to us, let them sail into the perfect firing position, then strike before they knew we were there. The tension in the torpedo room was physical, Mother, something you could feel in the air, in the way men held themselves motionless and alert, in the silence broken only by the soft hum of electric motors and the occasional creak of the hull under pressure. My hands rested on the firing controls for tubes 1 and 2, waiting for the command that would send tons of steel and explosives swimming toward their targets. Sweat ran down my face despite the relative cool of depth, dripped off my chin onto the deck plating, left dark spots that would evaporate in the heat once we surfaced. "Stand by forward," O'Kane's voice through the speaker, and Chief BD confirmed ready status for all 6 tubes. Range 2,000 yards. Bearing 270, speed 12 knots, set depth 10 feet, spread 3 degrees. The targeting information, fed into the torpedo data computer, translated into gyro settings and depth settings that would guide the torpedoes to their targets. "Fire 1!" The command, and I opened the firing valve, felt the compressed air surge through the lines, felt the whole boat shudder slightly as 2 tons of torpedo ejected from tube 1 and began its run toward the target. 21 feet of Mark 18 torpedo, Mother, swimming through the Pacific at 46 knots, running silent on electric motors, carrying enough explosive to break a merchant ship's back. The design descended from Whitehead's original, propulsion system pushing it forward, depth mechanism keeping it at the set running depth, gyroscope maintaining straight course, contact exploder in the nose waiting for impact with enemy hull. 80 years of refinement from that first crude prototype infuse me. But the principles unchanged, the basic concept proven sound by a man who'd been told it was illegal and impossible. The wait between firing and impact is eternal, Mother. Seconds stretching into subjective minutes while you wonder if the torpedo is running true, if the depth setting was correct, if the gyro angle accounted properly for target movement, if any of 1,000 things that can go wrong went wrong. We listen through the hull, through our bones, for the sound of explosion that means a hit. Chief BD counts seconds under his breath, tracking the run time, estimating when we should hear impact. Paul prays silently, lips moving without sound. I hold my breath without meaning to, realize it only when my lungs start to burn, and I force myself to inhale. And then, wham! The sound of explosion transmitted through the water, through the hull, felt as much as heard, a deep, concussive rumble that makes the whole submarine vibrate. A hit, a clean hit, right where O'Kane aimed us. The men in the torpedo room allow themselves brief grins, quick nods of satisfaction, before returning to professional silence as we prepare to fire again. Fire 2! Another torpedo swimming toward another target. Fire 3! Building a spread, increasing the probability that at least one will hit even if the convoy takes evasive action. The boat shudders with each firing, compressed air hissing, tons of weight leaving the submarine and making her lighter, making her want to rise until the diving officer compensates by flooding ballast. The electric motors hum as reload crews pull fresh torpedoes from the racks, maneuver them into position to reload the empty tubes, work with practiced efficiency in cramped spaces where any mistake could cause injury or worse. More explosions, more hits, ships dying in the darkness above us while we remain submerged and hidden, protected by depth and stealth and the tactical advantage that Whitehead's invention gave submarines. O'Kane maneuvers us away from the convoy's track, puts distance between Tang and the escort destroyer that's probably going to start hunting us any second with depth charges that can kill us if they explode close enough. We go deep, rig for silent running, every man motionless, every non-essential system shut down, waiting to see if the enemy can find us in the vast ocean darkness. But I need to tell you about what happened on an earlier patrol, Mother, about the price we pay for using weapons that are products of innovation and engineering and human ingenuity. Need to tell you that even the best ideas demand sacrifice, that even machines built to perfection can fail in ways that kill the men who operate them. It was our third patrol, before I joined the crew, but a story they've told me since, a story that hangs over the torpedo room like a ghost. Tang had fired a spread of torpedoes at a Japanese convoy, watched them run toward their targets, waited for the explosions that would confirm hits. But one torpedo malfunctioned. Gyro failure, depth control failure. Something went wrong with the guidance system, and instead of running straight it turned in a circle, came back toward Tang, became a threat to its own ship instead of the enemy. The captain saw it through the periscope, this underwater missile running back toward them at 46 knots, realized they had maybe 30 seconds before it hit Tang's hull, and detonated and killed everyone aboard. He ordered emergency dive, try to get below the torpedo's running depth, pushed the boat down as fast as she'd go while men held on to anything solid and prayed. The torpedo passed overhead, maybe 5 feet of clearance, close enough that they could hear it through the hull, close enough that one man swore later he could smell the exhaust from its electric motor, though that's probably impossible. But another boat wasn't so lucky, Mother. USS Tullabee, lost with all hands earlier this year, probably killed by one of her own torpedoes that circled back and struck her. Tang's sister ship, USS Wahoo, lost last year with her entire crew, possibly from the same malfunction. These weapons that we depend on, that give us our striking power, that trace their lineage to Whitehead's genius, they can kill us as easily as they kill the enemy if something goes wrong, if the technology fails, if chance and probability turn against us. After that incident, Chief BD gathered us in the torpedo room, made us understand what we were working with. "These are not toys," he said, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "These are complex machines operating in hostile environments under extreme conditions. We maintain them perfectly, we test them thoroughly, we treat them with respect, because the alternative is dying. Robert Whitehead built something revolutionary, but revolution always carries risk. Our job is to minimize that risk while maximizing the weapon's effectiveness. That's what being a professional means." I think about that sometimes, Mother, when I'm running pre-fire checks on torpedoes, when I'm monitoring their launch, when I'm listening for the explosion that confirms a hit. Think about Whitehead in his workshop in Fiume, testing his prototype, knowing that any failure could kill him, but persisting because he believed in his design, believed that he'd solved the problems correctly, believed that the principle was sound, even if the execution needed refinement. Think about the courage it takes to create something new and dangerous, to work with tools that can kill you if you make mistakes, To trust your understanding of engineering and physics and mechanics even when everyone tells you it's impossible or illegal or too dangerous to attempt. That's the legacy I'm carrying forward, Mother. Not just the torpedo as a weapon, but the torpedo as proof that innovation requires courage, that progress demands risk, that the men who push boundaries and challenge assumptions and refuse to accept conventional wisdom's limits are the ones who change history, for better or worse. You raised me with faith, Mother, taught me to trust in God's providence and human goodness, took me to church every Sunday despite exhaustion from working 6 days a week to keep us housed and fed. That faith has been tested down here in this steel tube where we deal in death and destruction, where our entire purpose is sinking ships and killing sailors who are probably praying to their own gods for protection from threats like us. Hard to reconcile the commandment against killing with a job that involves deliberately targeting merchant vessels. Hard to square Christian charity with celebrating when torpedoes find their marks and men die by drowning or explosion or fire. But I've found a different kind of faith down here, Mother. A faith in human ingenuity and the power of determined minds to solve impossible problems. A faith that when we apply our intelligence and persistence and courage to challenges, we can create things that transcend their original purposes and become part of the human story. Whitehead's torpedo was designed to kill, yes, built for destruction, created to sink ships and drown sailors. But it was also proof that underwater navigation was possible, that mechanical devices could operate autonomously according to programmed instructions, that depth and direction could be controlled through clever engineering. The principles Whitehead pioneered, self-propulsion, hydrostatic depth control, gyroscopic stabilization, those principles have applications beyond warfare, Mother. Same technology that guides torpedoes could guide underwater research vessels, could help us explore ocean depths we've never reached, could advance human knowledge of the 70% of Earth's surface that's covered by water. The electric motors we use in Mark 18s, they're advancing battery technology and electric propulsion in ways that could revolutionize civilian transportation after the war. The precision manufacturing required to build torpedoes that run straight and true, that technical capability will transfer to peacetime industries, will help us build better machinery for peaceful purposes. That's the faith I'm carrying, Mother. Faith that human creativity, even when directed toward destruction, creates knowledge and capability that can serve higher purposes once the immediate crisis passes. Faith that the men who designed these weapons weren't evil but practical, responding to threats, trying to protect their countries, using their skills in service of survival. Faith that Robert Whitehead, despite creating an instrument of death, was fundamentally an engineer who loved solving problems, who got satisfaction from making things work, who probably never imagined that his invention would still be sinking ships 80 years after his first successful test. And faith in the men I serve with, Mother. Men like Chief BD who take pride in their work not because they enjoy killing, but because they understand their role in something larger than themselves. Because they know that every ship we sink brings us closer to victory and peace. Men like Lieutenant Red who jokes to cover his fear, who uses humor as armor against the psychological weight of what we're doing down here. Men like Seaman Paul who prays for everyone, enemy and friend alike, who maintains his humanity despite being trained as an instrument of war. We surfaced after the attack, Mother, came up under cover of darkness to recharge our batteries and ventilate the boat, to exchange the stale recycled air of the depths for fresh Pacific wind. I stood on the bridge during my watch, breathing deeply of salt air and freedom, looking at stars that seemed impossibly bright after hours of red battle lighting and artificial illumination. The ocean was calm, gentle swells rolling under us, moonlight painting silver paths across the water. Beautiful and peaceful, giving no hint of the violence that had occurred just hours before, no evidence of the ships we'd sunk or the men we'd killed. Commander O'Kane joined me on the bridge for a few minutes, smoking a cigarette, staring at the horizon where Japanese-held Formosa was invisible in the darkness. "You did good work tonight, Thomas," he said, using my full name instead of the Tommy most people call me. "Those torpedoes you maintain, they're what give us our power. Without them, we're just a slow, uncomfortable way to cross the ocean. With them, we're the most effective anti-shipping force in the Pacific. Sir, I asked, because I'd been thinking about it since the attack, do you ever think about Robert Whitehead? About the man who invented the weapon that makes all this possible? O'Kane looked at me, maybe surprised by the question, maybe wondering if I was getting philosophical in ways that aren't helpful in combat zones. I know the history, he said finally. Know that he built something everyone said was impossible, that he persisted despite opposition, that he changed naval warfare forever. I think about him sometimes, yeah. Wonder what he'd think of submarines like Tang, of torpedoes like the Mark 18, of the fact that his invention is helping us strangle Japan's war economy. Wonder if he'd be proud or horrified or both. Both, probably, I said. Every inventor must have complicated feelings about weapons. You create something because you can, because the technical challenge interests you, because you want to prove it's possible. Then you watch it get used to kill people, and you have to reconcile your pride in the engineering with your horror at the consequences. O'Kane nodded, took another drag on his cigarette. War is complicated, Thomas. We do terrible things for good reasons. Kill men who are probably decent people when they're not trying to kill us. Use our intelligence and creativity to design better ways of destroying each other. But we do it because the alternative, letting fascism win, letting Japan conquer Asia, letting evil triumph because good men refuse to fight, that alternative is worse. Whitehead gave us a tool. We're using that tool to win a war that needs to be won. That's as much moral clarity as we're going to get. He went below then, left me alone with the stars and the ocean and my thoughts about innovation and morality and the complicated legacy of men like Robert Whitehead, who create things that change history in ways they probably never imagined. I write you every chance I get, Mother, though most of these letters sit in my locker unposted because we can't send mail while on patrol, can't risk breaking radio silence or revealing our position to enemy forces that would love nothing more than to sink Tang and kill her crew. So they accumulate, these letters stack up in chronological order, a record of my thoughts and experiences and attempts to process what I'm living through down here in the depths. I write because it helps me maintain connection to the world I left behind, to the life I had before the Navy, to the boy who learned machining in Duluth shipyards and never imagined he'd end up as a torpedo man on a submarine in the Pacific. I write because putting words on paper makes experiences feel more real somehow, transforms them from chaotic sensory overload into organized narrative that has meaning and structure. I write because someday, if I survive this war, I want to remember what it was like, want to have a record of this time that's more reliable than memory, which fades and distorts and sometimes lies to protect us from truths too painful to face directly. And I write to you, Mother, because you're the person who taught me to value communication and expression, who read to me when I was young and encouraged me to read on my own, who believed that even a machinist's son should be able to write clearly and think deeply. These letters are my attempt to live up to that teaching, to prove that work with my hands doesn't mean emptiness in my head, to show you that I'm still the son you raised even though this war is changing me in ways I don't fully understand yet. I think about that copper locket you gave me before I shipped out, the one with the old photograph of you holding me as a baby, both of us looking impossibly young and innocent, and unprepared for what life would bring. That locket hangs on a pipe near my bunk, tied there with wire because I can't wear it on watch. Jewelry can catch on machinery and cause injuries, but I touch it every time I pass. Reminder of home and safety and unconditional love that exists regardless of what I do or where I go, or what this war turns me into. The one thing that doesn't rust, you said when you gave it to me. Copper being more resistant to corrosion than steel or iron. But it's more than just metal that resists rust, Mother. It's the love it represents, the connection between us that transcends distance and danger, and all the forces trying to corrode my humanity down here in this machine designed for killing. Tang has become one of the most successful submarines in the Pacific, Mother, has sunk more ships than almost any other boat in the fleet, has disrupted Japanese supply lines and contributed significantly to the slow strangulation of their war economy. Commander O'Kane is being talked about for Medal of Honor. Chief BD has been recommended for promotion. The whole boat's crew has been recognized for exceptional performance. We're heroes, if you believe the citations and commendations. Warriors who've distinguished ourselves in combat and brought honor to the Navy and the country. But success in submarine warfare is measured in ships sunk and tonnage destroyed, which means it's measured in men killed, in sailors who drowned or burned or died instantly when torpedoes detonated against their hulls. Every victory we celebrate represents tragedy for Japanese families, mothers who'll receive notifications that their sons aren't coming home, wives who'll become widows, children who'll grow up without fathers. I understand intellectually that this is war, that they'd kill us if positions were reversed, that Japan's aggression forced this conflict and our response is justified. But understanding intellectually doesn't make it easier emotionally, doesn't quiet the voice that asks if there's something fundamentally wrong with taking pride in killing, with celebrating death, with becoming efficient at destruction. Chief BD talks about this sometimes, usually late at night when most of the crew is sleeping and just a few of us are on watch, maintaining systems and standing ready for emergencies. The price of being good at this job, he said once, is living with what being good at this job means. We've sent thousands of men to the bottom, Thomas. Thousands. Some of them died instantly, never knew what hit them, just flash and pressure and nothing. But some of them died slowly, trapped in sinking ships, drowning as compartments flooded, or burned when fuel caught fire, or died of injuries over hours or days. That's on us. That's the weight we carry for being effective weapons against enemy shipping. Is it worth it? I asked. The effectiveness, the success, the ship sunk, is it worth what it costs us psychologically, morally? Chief was quiet for a long time, thinking, maybe questioning for the first time whether the answer he'd always accepted was actually true. Has to be, he finally said. Because if it's not worth it, if all this killing is just murder dressed up in uniform and justified by patriotism, then what the hell are we doing down here? What have we become? No, it has to be worth it. Japan has to be stopped. Their military has to be defeated. Their ability to wage war has to be destroyed. And we're the ones doing that destroying. One merchant ship at a time, one transport at a time, one supply vessel at a time. Our targets aren't warships usually, aren't combat vessels. They're merchants carrying food and fuel and ammunition and reinforcements. We're strangling Japan's ability to feed and equip its military, and every ship we sink makes victory a little closer, makes peace a little more likely. I want to believe him, Mother. Want to believe that what we're doing matters, that the deaths we cause are necessary, that history will judge us kindly for our effectiveness at killing. But I also can't shake the feeling that war damages everyone it touches, winners and losers alike, that there's no moral victory possible when victory requires becoming efficient killers, that the skills I'm developing down here, maintaining weapons, loading torpedoes, celebrating when they find their marks, those aren't skills I want to carry into peacetime, aren't parts of myself I want to keep once this war finally ends. I keep coming back to Robert Whitehead, Mother. Keep thinking about this man I've never met who died before I was born, but whose work continues to shape my life in profound ways. He wasn't a warrior, wasn't a soldier or sailor, was just an engineer who saw a technical problem and couldn't resist trying to solve it. The problem was how to deliver explosives to enemy ships from underwater, how to create a weapon that could swim independently toward its target, how to overcome the challenges of underwater navigation and propulsion and depth control. Whitehead solved those problems through persistence and innovation, through countless failed tests and incremental improvements, through refusal to accept that what authority told him was impossible actually was impossible. He built something that worked when everyone said it couldn't work, proved through demonstration that underwater weapons were viable when conventional wisdom said they weren't, created a technology that fundamentally changed how naval warfare was fought. And he did it despite being told it was illegal, Mother. That's the part that fascinates me, that resonates with something deep in how you raised me to think about rules and authority, and doing what's right versus doing what's authorized. Whitehead was told by the Austrian Navy that underwater weapons violated the honorable traditions of naval combat, that attacking from beneath was cowardly and unchivalrous, that if he persisted in developing this technology, he'd be working outside official sanction. But he kept working anyway, kept refining his design, kept believing that the principle was sound even when authority figures told him to stop. That takes courage, Mother. Not the physical courage of facing enemy fire, but the moral courage of trusting your own judgment against authority, of believing in your work enough to persist despite opposition, of being willing to be wrong but also being confident enough to prove you're right. You taught me that kind of courage in your own way, taught me to question what I was told and think for myself, and not accept that something was impossible just because everyone said it was. Authority isn't always right, you'd tell me when I'd come home frustrated by some arbitrary rule at school or work. Sometimes the people in charge are just wrong, and it takes someone brave enough to show them they're wrong to make progress happen. Whitehead was that someone. His torpedo revolutionized naval warfare, made surface ships vulnerable in ways they'd never been before, forced navies worldwide to develop new tactics and defenses and strategies to counter underwater threats. Submarines became viable as combat vessels specifically because torpedoes gave them striking power, gave them the ability to sink ships much larger than themselves, gave them tactical significance beyond just reconnaissance or harassment. Everything Tang does, everything we've accomplished, every ship we've sunk, all of it traces back to one engineer who refused to accept limits on what was possible. After we surface, after the batteries are recharged and the air is fresh and we've submerged again to continue the patrol, I go to the torpedo room during my off-watch time and I do something that would probably seem strange to the other men if they knew about it. I clean the brass fittings on the torpedoes, polish them until they shine, treat these weapons with care that goes beyond mere maintenance. And while I work, I pray, Mother. Not the formal prayers you taught me from the Book of Common Prayer, but prayers of my own making, conversations with God about what we're doing down here and why and whether it's justified and whether I'll be able to live with myself when this war is over. Thank you, Mr. Whitehead, I whisper sometimes, addressing a man who's been dead for decades, thanking an engineer who never knew I'd exist, acknowledging the debt I owe to his genius and his courage. Thank you for refusing to give up, for persisting when everyone told you to stop, for trusting your understanding of physics and mechanics enough to prove that underwater weapons could work. Thank you for solving problems that seemed impossible, for creating something that continues to serve its purpose 80 years after your first successful test. And then I pray for the men we've killed, Mother, for the Japanese sailors who died when our torpedoes found their targets, for the enemy who are as human as we are even though we're at war, for the families who'll grieve losses just like our families would grieve if we were the ones who died. I know that's not what most people would pray for, and know that conventional war wisdom says you don't humanize the enemy. Don't think too hard about the consequences of your actions. Don't let empathy interfere with efficiency. But you raised me to believe that all life is sacred, that every person is made in God's image, that even necessary killing leaves stains on the... Forgive us. Forgive us for being good at killing, for taking pride in destruction, for celebrating when ships sink and men die. We do what we must. But that doesn't make it clean or pure or righteous. Help us carry this weight without being crushed by it. Help us survive this war without losing our humanity. Help us remember that the men we kill are sons and brothers and fathers who deserve to be mourned, even though we were the ones who killed them. Chief B.D. found me praying once, caught me with my hands on a torpedo and my lips moving in silent conversation with God, or Whitehead, or my own conscience. He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away, left me to my devotions or whatever you want to call these moments of trying to maintain moral clarity in circumstances that seem designed to erode it. Later he told me, "Never stop doing that, Thomas. Never stop thinking about what we're doing and why. The day you stop questioning is the day you stop being human and become just a weapon yourself, a tool that someone else uses without conscience or consideration. Keep your humanity. We need it down here." I'm going to survive this war, Mother. I'm going to use every bit of skill you helped me develop. Every lesson about machinery and maintenance and paying attention to details. Every ounce of luck and caution and situational awareness to make it through however many more patrols Tang has before victory or tragedy ends our combat career. I'm going to trust the torpedoes I maintain, and the crew I serve with, and the captain who commands us. Going to trust that Whitehead's principles of design are sound, and that 80 years of refinement have made these weapons as reliable as anything designed to explode can be. But I also know that survival in submarine warfare is partly chance, partly skill, and substantially luck. The best submarines with the best crews and the best maintenance can still be caught by enemy depth charges, can still develop mechanical failures at critical moments, can still fall victim to the 1,000 ways that steel tubes operating in hostile environments can fail. Tang has been lucky so far, has survived situations that killed other boats, has come home from patrols that probably should have ended in disaster. But luck doesn't last forever, and eventually the odds catch up with everyone. If I don't make it home, Mother, if the next letter you receive is from the Navy informing you that Tang was lost with all hands, I want you to know that I died doing something that mattered, using skills you helped me develop, honoring the education in mechanics and engineering and respect for machines that started in those Duluth shipyards when I was just a boy learning to hold a wrench. I want you to know that I thought about you every day, touched that copper locket every time I passed it, drew strength from knowing that somewhere back in Minnesota you were praying for my safety and believing in my survival. And I want you to know that I maintained my humanity despite everything, that I never stopped questioning what we were doing or why, that I honored both Whitehead's engineering genius and my own moral conscience by treating these weapons with respect and acknowledging the terrible responsibility that comes with being good at destruction. I tried to be both an effective torpedo man and a decent human being, tried to do my job without losing my soul, tried to serve my country without forgetting the values you taught me about the sanctity of life and the importance of empathy even for enemies. But I am planning to survive, Mother. Planning to complete this patrol and return to Pearl Harbor and eventually, when the war ends, board a ship home to the United States and take a train to Minnesota and walk through that door where you'll be waiting. Planning to hug you and cry and tell you in person all the things these letters can only approximate, all the fear and pride and moral ambiguity and complicated emotions that come from fighting underwater in a machine designed by genius and operated by courage and armed with weapons that trace their lineage back to a man who refused to accept that innovation was illegal. This patrol will end eventually, Mother. Either we'll expend all our torpedoes and return to base for resupply, or we'll suffer damage that forces us home early, or command will recall us after a set number of days at sea. And when it ends, we'll surface for the final time, set course for Pearl Harbor, cruise on the surface with all hatches open and fresh air flowing through the boat, washing away weeks of accumulated staleness and confinement and the psychological weight of living inside a steel tube beneath the Pacific. I dream about that moment, Mother. Dream about standing on the bridge as we approach port, seeing the mountains of Oahu rising from the ocean, seeing the harbor full of ships and the base full of life and activity, seeing the world above water that we protect but don't get to inhabit while we're on patrol. Dream about stepping onto the dock with solid ground under my feet, about the strange sensation of walking on something that doesn't move, about sleeping in a bed that doesn't rock with the waves or tilt when the boat changes depth. And I dream about after the war, about when Tang's combat career is over and I can leave the Navy and return to civilian life, can go back to being a machinist in a shipyard instead of a torpedo man on a submarine. Dream about working with my hands on machines that build instead of destroy, about using the skills I've refined down here to maintain engines and repair equipment and contribute to peaceful commerce instead of warfare. Dream about standing in a workshop that smells like oil and metal and honest labor, about coming home at the end of the day tired but not traumatized, satisfied with work that creates value instead of eliminates enemies. I want to open a shop, Mother. Small machine shop in Duluth, near the docks where I learned my trade, serving the shipping industry that made our city what it is. Want to hire young men like I was and teach them what I've learned about mechanics and engineering and respect for machines. Want to pass forward the education you made possible through your sacrifices. Want to tell them about Robert Whitehead when they get frustrated with difficult problems. Tell them that the most important innovations often come from people who refuse to accept conventional wisdom. Tell them that being told something is impossible just means it hasn't been done yet, not that it can't be done. And I want you to retire, Mother. Want you to stop cleaning offices and doing laundry for wealthy families and working yourself to exhaustion to make ends meet. Want to support you the way you supported me. Want to give you comfort and security and the leisure to enjoy life instead of just surviving it. Want to take you to church on Sundays, not because you have to keep up appearances, but because you want to worship in community. Want to see you at peace instead of perpetually anxious about money and health and whether your son will survive the war. That's the future I'm fighting for, Mother. Not abstract concepts like freedom or democracy, though those matter too, but concrete personal futures. The life I want to build with you once this war is over. The shop and the home and the peaceful existence that seems impossibly distant right now, but that motivates me to be careful, to survive, to make it through each patrol and each attack and each moment of danger until I can finally come home. The patrol continues, Mother, and Tang continues hunting, and I continue maintaining torpedoes and praying and trying to reconcile my pride in our effectiveness with my horror at what effectiveness means. The war continues, and Japan continues fighting despite losses that should convince them surrender is inevitable, and we continue sinking ships and disrupting supply lines and contributing to the slow strangulation that will eventually force their capitulation. And I continue surviving day by day, watch by watch, patrol by patrol, carrying forward the legacy of an engineer who defied authority to create something revolutionary. I think Robert Whitehead would be proud of what his invention has become, Mother. Not proud of the death and destruction, because no decent person could take pride in that, but proud that his engineering principles have proven sound, that his understanding of physics and mechanics was correct, that his persistence in the face of opposition was justified by results. He created something that worked, something that changed history, something that continues to shape the world 80 years after his first successful test. That's the kind of legacy every engineer dreams of, the kind of lasting contribution that transcends the immediate purpose and becomes part of human technological advancement. And I'm proud to be part of that legacy, Mother. Proud to maintain and employ weapons that represent the pinnacle of underwater ballistic engineering. Proud to serve on a boat that's among the most effective submarine hunters in the Pacific. Proud to be doing work that requires skill and knowledge and careful attention to detail. But I'm also aware of the cost. Aware that pride in effectiveness comes with the burden of knowing what that effectiveness destroys. Aware that every technical advancement in warfare carries moral weight that can't be escaped through clever rationalization or appeals to necessity. So I carry both, pride and horror, satisfaction and guilt, confidence in our mission and doubt about its cost. I maintain torpedoes with care and launch them with precision and celebrate when they find their targets and pray for the souls of the men they kill. I honor Whitehead's genius while acknowledging the terrible purposes his genius serves. I do my duty as a sailor and maintain my conscience as a human being and try to hold both in tension without letting either one overwhelm the other. Keep praying for me, Mother. Keep believing I'll make it home. Keep that copper locket safe and your faith strong and your love constant. I'm coming back to you, bringing with me everything I've learned about machines and warfare, and the complicated relationship between innovation and morality, about how the same human creativity that builds torpedoes could build better worlds if we just direct it toward construction instead of destruction. Your son beneath the waves, Tommy MM2C Thomas R. USS Tang, SS-306, somewhere in the Pacific, October 24th, 1944. I touched the torpedo tubes this morning, Mother, felt the cold steel and thought about Whitehead in Fiume with his first prototype. Thought about all the incremental improvements across 80 years that turned that crude experiment into the Mark 18s we carry now. Thought about how innovation is a relay race. each generation building on what came before, each engineer standing on the shoulders of predecessors, each advancement making possible the next step forward. Whitehead started something that continues through me and through every other torpedo man in every submarine in the fleet, continues through the engineers who keep improving the designs, continues through the future applications of principles he pioneered. That's legacy, Mother. Not just what you create, but what you enable others to create afterward. Not just your own contribution, but the cascade of contributions you make possible. And that legacy, that chain of innovation and improvement, and refusal to accept limits, that's what's going to win this war and shape the peace that follows. Not just our torpedoes, but the mindset they represent. The belief that human ingenuity can solve any problem if we're brave enough to try and stubborn enough to persist when everyone tells us to give up. Thomas survived World War II, though USS Tang did not. On October 25, 1944, just one day after he wrote the letter to his mother, Tang was lost in the Formosa Strait when one of her own torpedoes malfunctioned, circled back, and struck the submarine. The explosion killed most of the crew instantly. Thomas was one of only 9 survivors from a complement of 78 men, rescued by Japanese forces and held as prisoners of war until the conflict ended. He never spoke about the 10 months he spent in prisoner of war camps, never shared details about the treatment he endured or the conditions he survived. When pressed by family or friends, he'd simply say, "I was lucky to survive," and change the subject. The psychological scars from watching his shipmates die and being unable to save them, from the cruel irony of being killed by their own weapon, from the months of captivity and uncertainty about whether he'd survive to see liberation, those scars went deeper than any visible wound and never fully healed. Thomas returned to Duluth in 1946, thinner and quieter than the young man who'd left 4 years earlier. He opened the machine shop he'd dreamed about, a small operation serving the shipping industry on Lake Superior, teaching young apprentices the same skills his mother had made it possible for him to learn. Above his workbench hung a plaque that read, "Invention is not sin, only silence is." A reminder of Whitehead's courage in defying authority and the importance of innovation, even when it challenges conventional wisdom. He never worked on military equipment again, politely declining contracts that would have required him to maintain or repair weapons systems. "I've done my part," he'd explained simply. "Let someone else handle that now." Instead, he focused on peaceful machinery, ship engines, dock equipment, industrial tools that built and transported and created value without destroying anything. The precision and care he'd learned maintaining torpedoes, transferred seamlessly to civilian work, made him one of the most respected machinists in Duluth. His mother, Margaret, lived to see him establish his business and marry a local schoolteacher named Anne in 1949. She died peacefully in 1958 at age 62, surrounded by family, clutching the copper locket Thomas had given back to her when he returned from the war. At her funeral, Thomas spoke about the sacrifices she'd made, the values she'd taught, the foundation she'd provided that had kept him alive through circumstances that killed most of his crewmates. "She taught me to respect machines and question authority and maintain my humanity regardless of circumstances," he said. "Those lessons saved my life more than any military training ever did." Thomas lived until 1994, dying at age 75 from complications of pneumonia, his lungs never fully recovering from months of malnutrition and poor conditions during his imprisonment. At his funeral, elderly men showed up wearing submarine service pins, survivors of other boats who'd known Tang's reputation and respected the men who'd served aboard her. They spoke of Commander O'Kane, who'd also survived the sinking and earned the Medal of Honor for Tang's extraordinary combat record before her loss. They spoke of the 24 ships and over 93,000 tons of Japanese shipping Tang had sent to the bottom, of the contribution one submarine and her crew had made to Allied victory in the Pacific. But they also spoke of Thomas's character, of how he'd maintained his humanity through circumstances that would have broken lesser men, of how he'd honored both his technical responsibilities and his moral conscience, of how he'd treated the weapons he maintained with respect while acknowledging the terrible purposes they served. "He was a professional who never stopped being human," one veteran said. "That's harder than it sounds in submarine warfare. That's an achievement worth remembering." The torpedo as a weapon traces its lineage directly to Robert Whitehead's innovations in Fiume in the 1860s. The principles he pioneered, self-propulsion, depth control, gyroscopic stabilization, remain fundamental to modern torpedo design, have been refined and improved, but not fundamentally changed. Submarines became viable as combat vessels specifically because torpedoes gave them striking power, transformed them from reconnaissance platforms into primary anti-shipping weapons. In World War II, American submarines sank over 55% of Japanese merchant shipping, crippling Japan's war economy and contributing significantly to Allied victory. Every one of those sinkings traced back to Whitehead's refusal to accept that underwater weapons were impossible or illegal. But Whitehead's legacy extends beyond warfare. The engineering principles he developed have applications in underwater research, deep-sea exploration, marine biology, and countless civilian uses. The precision manufacturing techniques required to build reliable torpedoes advanced industrial capability generally. The depth control and navigation systems pioneered for torpedoes informed the development of other underwater vehicles. Innovation in one domain creates capability in others, even when the original purpose was destruction. If this letter moved you, if Tommy's courage and Robert Whitehead's defiant genius deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel and leave your like. Every subscription helps us preserve voices like theirs, voices that remind us that invention too is an act of faith, that human creativity can serve both destruction and creation, that the same minds that build weapons can build worlds. There are thousands more stories untold. Engineers like Whitehead, who refused to accept limits. Sailors like Thomas, who maintained their humanity while operating instruments of death. Mothers like Margaret, who sacrificed everything so their sons could learn skills that kept them alive. Crews like Tang's, who gave everything for victory. Your support keeps their memory alive. Your subscription ensures the next generation understands that technology is morally neutral, that human choice determines whether innovation serves life or death, that the same creativity that builds torpedoes could solve humanity's greatest challenges if we just redirect it. Subscribe. Leave your like. Share this story. And if your family ever worked with ships or machines, or if you knew someone who served in submarines, write their names in the comments. Let's honor them together. Robert Whitehead changed naval warfare by refusing to accept that authority knew better than engineering, by trusting physics and mechanics over conventional wisdom, by persisting when everyone told him to stop. Thomas honored that legacy by maintaining Whitehead's descendants with skill and care, by questioning what he was doing even while doing it excellently, by surviving circumstances that killed most of his shipmates and using that survival to build peaceful things afterward. Both men, the engineer and the sailor, the inventor and the operator, the civilian and the military, proved that human ingenuity matters, that innovation changes history, that courage comes in many forms. Thomas R. Margaret R. Robert Whitehead, Commander O'Kane, Chief BD, the 78 men of USS Tang. Their names deserve to be spoken. Their contributions deserve to be remembered. Their legacy, innovation through persistence, humanity through horror, construction after destruction, deserves to inspire future generations facing their own impossible problems. Their voices, our mission, over and out.